Bill. Let's get this show rolling.
Okay, let's do
So,
it.
all right. Well, welcome back to the New Dentist Show. It's always an honor to be your host here. It's week 5, so it's kind of cruised along, and it's been such a fun ride so far. So, I want to officially welcome my guest, but also my unofficial co-host for the last several weeks, Dr. Bill Robbins. So, welcome back on the show, Bill.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to be here. Thank you.
So, as you know how this show works, I want to kind of pick your brain, but it's going to be fun for me because the first episode, you really picked my brain. So I'm
Yeah.
going to, in that favor, really hit you hard here. But for those that don't know you, I would love to have you just kind of do a brief introduction of what you're doing currently, and we can kind of run through your background in the future.
Okay, so I've been out of school a long time. I graduated from dental school in 1973. And after I graduated from school, I did well, let me back up a minute. My dad and granddad are both dentists, and actually my two uncles also. So I grew up in a dental family. And I just assumed I was going to go back to work with my father when I graduated from dental school. That's what we'd always said would happen. He had a place in the office for me. And when I was a junior dental student, he said one day, you know, I've been reading about these things they call dental internships. They weren't called GPR yet.
Sure.
And he said, I think you ought to do one before you come back and go to work. And I said, well, what is it? I don't know about it. And he said, well, you go to the VA hospital and they have a program, and you work in the hospital and the dental service for a year and learn what they have to teach. And then afterwards you can come home if you want. I said, okay. You know, back in those days, you did what your dad told you to do.
Right.
So I said, so what do I do? And I was going to school at University of Tennessee in Memphis. He said, go to the VA. So I went over there, and sure enough, they had an internship program there. I applied for it, and I didn't get in there, but I got in at a program in Leavenworth, Kansas. And Leavenworth, Kansas doesn't sound like a great place to go with all the prisons.
Never heard of that, right?
But it turned out to be the center of the dental education universe for the VA. It was an amazing place. They had graduate programs and everything there, plus this GPR program. And so I did a year, and back in those days, you had to pay the year back. And so at the end of the first year, I had another year to think about it. And when I was doing the program, it was a block program. And so you'd be 3 months in perio and 3 months in oral surgery and so on. And after I finished each block, that's what I wanted to be. So in the context of that whole year, I wanted to be an oral surgeon, a periodontist, and a prosthodontist, and
Sure.
you know, an endodontist. And so at the end of it, I thought, well, God, maybe I want to do it all. So halfway into the second year, I applied for a 2-year GPR in San Diego with the VA. And so I moved to San Diego, actually La Jolla, which is pretty cool, and did a 2-year GPR there. And that had a giant impact on everything I still do today, those 3 years of training. And I had to go somewhere afterwards to pay back those 2 years, and that's how I got to San Antonio.
Sure.
And so I moved back to San Antonio. It was a great place. It was a new program. A new hospital, and they had a GPR already going at the VA, so I could come right back and start working in the GPR. There's a brand new dental school right across the street that I could, you know, work a half a day a week or so. And so it was a great assignment. And so I worked in the GPR for a couple of years and then became director of the GPR and did that for about 3 years. And then I decided I wanted to go have an adventure. And so I joined the Air Force, and with a guaranteed assignment to Germany. So my wife and I took off to Germany for 2.5 years and just had a, you know, wonderful, we'd only been married for about a year, and we had a wonderful time there. And then they curtailed my assignment, which means they cut it short and brought me right back to San Antonio, where there's a AGD program that the Air Force teaches. And so I became a co-director of the 2-year AGD program for the Air Force. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I got out of the Air Force and went to the dental school in San Antonio. And I ran the AGD program there for about 10 years. And then after 25 years of institutional dentistry, I decided that I was ready to do private practice. So I quit institutional dentistry and went to private practice about 23 years ago.
Sure.
And that's where I've been since. So I've had, you know, a little bit of both sides of the track. I've been on the academic side the first half of my career, and the private practice side the second half. So it's been a great run. I've loved every minute of it.
I tried to keep up with a lot of that, but it was just a lot of back and forth. But
yeah,
I do want to, let's start with the beginning for a minute. So
Yeah.
growing up with a grandfather, a father, and 2 uncles in dentistry, was it just assumed that you would do dentistry?
Yeah, I had a wonderful father. We got along very well, and he was kind of a country dentist, and he would work in the mornings, and at the end of the morning at noon, he'd take a quick nap, and then he'd go to the farm. He was a farmer who happened to be a dentist. So his passion was farming, not dentistry.
Sure.
And our home and office were together. And so from the time I was a little bitty kid, I followed my dad around in the dental office.
Oh,
and
cool.
so I grew up in a dental office, but it wasn't like I had any real interest in dentistry. I mean, I didn't hang out because I was interested in the dentistry. I hung out because I liked being around him.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was my life growing up. Being around dentistry was just the way I grew up. And that's just all I ever figured I would do. In fact, my grandfather had a big impact on me also. He taught me to fish. You know, we were just talking before we got started.
Sure.
I was on a fishing trip last week in New Mexico. But my grandfather really taught me to fish. And so I spent a lot of time with him. And he was a dentist also. And I remember when I was about 16, we were fishing, and I decided I was going to go to dental school. So I told my granddad, you know, I've decided I'm going to be a dentist. And he goes, really? And he wasn't all that excited. And I said, well, why you have no excitement? He said, well, we got a lot of dentists in the family. I was hoping you'd go to law school, become a lawyer. And I said, no, that's not for me. And he says, all right, well, that's
Sure.
fine. And so I was just another in a long, long line of dentists. And so that's how it started for me. I grew up around dentistry.
And then you met your wife in dental school?
Yeah. So I met my wife when I moved back to San Antonio. She's a San Antonio girl.
Okay.
And we were both volunteering, actually. That was the nice part of the story. When I did my residency in San Diego, I lived near the beach. I was living in San Diego. I lived on Mission Beach, and I had a little house on Mission Beach. And I hung out on the beach a lot. And one Saturday, there was a clown out on the beach clowning. And I went out and started hanging out with her and talking to her. And it just looked like it was a lot of fun. And I said, how'd you learn to be a clown? And she said, they have a night school at San Diego State where you can take a clown program in the evening. And I said, really? She said, yeah, but I think it's about to quit. I think this is going to be the last semester they're doing it. So if you want to do it, you better sign up. So I said, okay. So I went and signed up. And so I did my dental residency during the day, and I went to clown school at night. And so by the time I finished clown school, I was pretty good. I mean, I took mime classes and juggling classes and magic classes. And so, I was a serious clown. And I moved to San Antonio and was doing clowning on the side just for parties and hospitals and things. And so the Dental Society asked me Dental Hygiene Society to come and volunteer to be a clown at this brush-in at a mall during Dental Health Month. Okay. And so I dressed up. I went to be the clown at this brush-in, and my wife Brenda was there as a young hygienist. And that's where we met. I saw her in the crowd, and I pulled her out because I always would get somebody to be my helper, when I was juggling. I'd embarrass them and so on. And that's where we met. We were both volunteering, and we met, and it turned into a 40-year romance. We celebrated our 40th anniversary last January.
Awesome. No, what a story. Who would have thought clowning would turn into
Yeah, you never know. You just never know how these pieces of the chain link together,
So my wife being a hygienist too, I can probably understand that she's probably shaped a lot of your career. Is that something that you would also agree with that? I mean,
yeah, I don't know. Dentistry has this very interesting love-hate relationship with dental hygienists that I've never totally understood. Because when I'm at dental meetings, I mean, dentists are either one or the other. Either they love and respect their hygienist, sure, or they think that they're prima donnas, they get paid too much and blah, blah, blah. And I've been hearing this now for 40 years. And I mean, I've always been on the side of the coin, partially because, I live with a hygienist, but partially because, I mean, I've always been surrounded by great hygienists.
Sure. And
still am. I mean, in our office, we have 3 hygienists. And all 3 of them are just great human beings, and they're team players, and they'll take the garbage out. They'll come assist me. I mean, everybody, nobody's too good to do anything. And it's always been that way in my office. And so I've never understood this enmity between hygienists and dentists. So yeah, I would say that probably having a hygienist as a wife has to some degree impacted my view of that world, but also because I've just been surrounded by wonderful hygienist all my career.
I couldn't agree more with that. I don't understand um, why hygienists are treated in such demeaning manner. I mean, if they're there to support, they're there to kind of be part of the team. And it's just, to me, I guess, yeah, having a wife who's a hygienist as well kind of gives you a perspective on things. But at the same point, I don't know. My hygienists are all on the Facebook pages, and they always say, I can't believe there's so many hygienists out there that, the stories that come on these pages, and these dentists treat them that way. And they'll go, the mile for you in every capacity. So I always have these meetings. I try and kind of have these one-on-one chats with people. I'm like, I see you, I respect you, I appreciate you, I value you, all the time. And it's just like, it's all in return too. And if you go a mile for them, they're going to go 4 for you. So, but my wife kind of gave me that exposure too. So I guess it helps to have that, but I think that's a mission of mine. Is we're going to have a couple hygienists on here to hopefully kind of represent that side of things with this channel too.
I don't know. It's a very interesting thing. I really believe part of the problem is that hygienists are highly educated and underutilized in most practices. Right. And we'll be talking about global diagnosis, I know, in a few minutes, but the hygiene room is the absolute perfect place to implement a new treatment planning system in your practice, because you have whatever you have, 10, 15 new patients a month, but you have 1,000 that are already in the practice, most of whom need dentistry that hadn't been done yet. And,
Correct.
That's the greatest place to market in your hygiene practice. And if your hygienist understands a system like global diagnosis, then they are set up to say, Dr. Robbins, I just answered the 5 questions on Mrs. Jones, and I think there's some things that she might be interested in hearing from you about what treatment possibilities are.
Sure.
And you can have a quick discussion with Mrs. Jones, and then you can get her back for a comprehensive exam, because you can't do comprehensive dentistry if you don't do a comprehensive exam.
5 minutes.
And our practices are full of people that really need to have a new, fresh look, a comprehensive exam, and starting in the hygiene office is the right place to do it. So
those are the best patients, because they're already trusting patients. They're already
exactly. The trust should already be there in those patients. You don't have to build it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. But this all comes back to the idea that you educate them. You spend time teaching them and training them and going through what to look for, because I think a lot of times we just assume pick up a scaler and go to town. It's not going to get the results you're going to get, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely. And the other cool thing that has come along in recent years is, as my consciousness has been raised about airway and airway issues in the relationship to dentistry, I've become more and more interested in myofunctional therapy as an essential part of the dental team. And about, 2.5 years ago, I was talking to my wife, and I said, I think this is cut out for you, because the 2 people that can go do myofunctional therapy school are speech pathologists or speech therapists and dental hygienists. And I said, I think y'all look into it. And she did. And she's now become a myofunctional therapist. And so that's what she's doing. She's really not doing much hygiene anymore. She's become a myofunctional therapist. And so I've not only got an old hygienist as a wife, but I've got a new myofunctional therapist, which is just an awesome person to have on the team. And I would have never even thought about that, 10 years ago. Never was even on my mind. And now I've got one. So I just think dental hygienists are just a great part of the practice. And I wish that we as a profession utilize their skills more than we do.
I couldn't agree more. That's our campaign right now, I guess, right? Just to kind of keep that going. But yeah. So tell me, with your father, you mentioned that he was a great mentor of yours. I'm sure just being around that, you grew up through osmosis, a lot of things about dentistry that you did. Is there anything in particular you picked up with them?
Yeah, I would say my father, in retrospect, was a mediocre dentist. It was back in the days when you did amalgams, you pulled teeth, and you did dentures. And I remember one time, just before I was going to dental school, he said, they're going to show you how to use one of these when you get to dental school. And he pulled out this big roll of rubber dam. And he took a piece of it off, and it was rotten. I mean, it had probably been in a drawer for 30 years,
Sure.
And he laughed, and he said, yeah, they'll tell you need to use this when you do a filling. You don't really need to. And so my dad was a mediocre dentist, I assume, although he may have been a real good dentist. I don't really know. But what I do know is that his patients loved him.
Sure.
He was just an amazing man in his ability to communicate with people, especially working people. And commonly, we'd leave the office and go home if I was hanging out with him, and he'd have a couple of intraoral mirrors in his pocket. And I'd say, what are you doing with those? And he said, oh, we're going to stop down at the garage down on Main Street. I've got a couple of buddies down there, and they mechanics love these dental mirrors because they can look up under places under the car that you can't see directly. And so he was always doing stuff like that. And so his patients just loved it. In fact, when I was in dental school, one summer I hung out with him a lot. I don't remember which year it was, between which years, but I was in the office a lot. And several times during that summer, he would walk out and I'd be standing in the room. And so, mostly country people and working class people. And they say, so son, I hear you're going to dental school. And I say, yes, sir, I am. And over again, I would hear, if you're half the dentist your father is, you'll be a hell of a dentist. And so I grew up, believing that he was a great dentist because his patients believed he was a great dentist. And he was. He was a great communicator, that's for sure. So that's, I think, what I learned from him was the communicate. Not really, I didn't learn communication from him. I learned how successful he was as a dentist because of his communication skills with people. They loved being around him.
It says everything. I mean, that pulls at my heart right there because, I mean, that's just something taken over my dad and uncle, their patience. And just, I was questionable about you when you first came in, but, now you've upped your game so much that elevates above him. Like, oh my God, I can't even. So I feel you there. It's such a cool moment when someone can say something like that. So, but communication's huge. If you can relate to people, if you can get that trust, no matter what kind of dentistry you're really doing, it ultimately, if it comes from a good place, you're going to do your best work. And
I'm assuming that there's young dentists listening. I mean, that's the whole point of this. And if I were going to recommend where you'd spend your money, I think there are places that are really good to go. And from a dental point of view, you got a handful. You've got Dawson, you got Pank, you got Coys and Spear. Mm-hmm. So those are 4 awesome places to learn dentistry. You can't go wrong in any of those places. But if I were going to recommend where to spend your money, I would say you need to learn communication skills and leadership skills because I do not believe that we're born with either.
No.
There may be people that have the tendency and the personality, but most people do not have great communication skills, nor do they have leadership skills. Those are learned. So leaders are made, they're created, and communicators are created. And so reading books, number 1, and number 2, getting professional help. I know you're a believer because you got Kirk's help. And when I first went into private practice, I had been out of dental school 25 years. So I was in no way a beginner dentist, but I was a beginner private practice dentist.
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
My leadership skills were not great.
Sure.
My communication skills were not great. And ultimately, I realized that it took about 18 months. And when the pain got great enough, that's when you ultimately decide you got to get help. And when you can ill afford to do it, by the way.
Sure.
So, I absolutely didn't have the money I needed to hire a consultant, but I had no choice. And so bringing a consultant into our practice was one of the smartest things I ever did, even though at the time it was such a stretch. We had to borrow the money. We had to go borrow the money to afford to bring a consultant in, and yet it still pays dividends today. So I really think spending money on that part, on the soft part of the practice, makes a lot of sense.
Sure. Now, what drove you to do consultant, though? Was there anything that was a tipping point?
There was several things. The first was cash flow. I was starting a practice from scratch, and so literally, and Brenda my wife was obviously managing it, and she would get a check in the mail for $300, and she said, "Yeah, I can pay the water today," And it was literally hand to mouth. So the first was cash flow. The second was systems. We just didn't have systems in our practice because we were starting sort of from scratch with the help of another dentist, and there just weren't a great number of systems in the practice. And so it was cash flow and systems. It's what finally the pain got so great that I felt like I had to have the help.
Sure. I mean, and at that point, it's also humbling, right? Because you've been into the career for so long. At that point, you think you know, and then you have to take a step back and relearn things, right? So,
Oh yeah, going into private practice was a very humbling time for me in a number of
sure,
ways. It was certainly humbling in the whole issue of the management side of the practice. I was ill prepared for that. But I was also the guy at the dental school that the dentists would bring their wives to, and they would come to. And, I was the guy, the dentist that was treating the other dentist in the school. So
sure.
I had this idea that I was pretty good. I mean, I was a big fish in a real small pond, and I just had this self-image that I was a pretty good dentist. And when I got into private practice, and you start doing 8 a day instead of 1 in an afternoon, and you start working with a good lab that starts telling you you're not near as good as you thought you were in a nice way. And so for the first at least 2.5 years, when I went from the dental school into full-time private practice, it was the most humbling time of my life because I was ill prepared in many ways to start a private practice. And like you said, I mean, I'd been director of 3 residency programs. And so I thought I understood the dentistry side of it pretty well, but it was not private practice. I was in many ways ill prepared to do it. So yeah, very humbling.
But I'm imagining going back, you would do it all over again.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I wouldn't change a thing. I've
Sure.
loved every step along the way. And I've sort of done it backwards. Most dentists, go into private practice and they practice for 30 years and then they end their careers up giving back to
Sure.
dentistry, teaching at a dental school. And I think that's an awesome way to finish a career.
Sure.
And I did it just the opposite. I did the 25 years first and then went to private practice. And so
Sure.
it's been a great run.
So then my question to you would be, you have the son is a second year student, right? What would you tell Andrew in terms of guidance and show? I mean, you got to let him fail, right? And go out there and experience. But is there certain things you're going to
Well,
tell him or
I just
advise
don't.
about?
I don't have a lot of advice for him. To be honest with you, um, I tell him I think you ought to do as well as you can do didactically, so the doors are open for you to specialize if that's what you choose to do.
Sure.
But I don't know. I don't. The older I get, the less advice I give, and unless people really ask specifically for some advice from me, I don't offer it much anymore because I don't know. I just feel like to give people advice, you've got to have more knowledge about what's going on than you really have. You don't really know what their needs are. You don't really know what's going on in their minds. And you're giving advice based on your filters, not theirs. And so I'm not a big give advice guy anymore. And so basically, I'm just supportive of him. We had dinner tonight. This is his first day of his second year. And
Sure.
so it was fun. He got to be back with his friends again. And so we talk a lot. And he did a diagnostic wax up for me, actually 2 last weekend. I had a motivational mock-up today that I did on a patient, and it was just an analog deal where I just had him wax some back teeth, and I wanted to add volume on the posterior to go with teeth in the front that were bolder. And so he does a fair amount of diagnostic waxing for me now in the office, and he's artistic. He's really gotten good at waxing, and so
Experience.
I'm supportive of that. And he sat with me chairside a lot during the year before he went to dental school, but I don't have a lot of advice for him. Find your bliss. I tell him he's got to do something after he gets out of school. He's got to do either a residency program, an AGD, GPR. He's got to do something once he gets out. But after that, he's on his own. Find your bliss, because I've already sold my practice. I sold my
Sure.
half of a partnership last year. So I have a young prosthodontist now that's my boss. And um, and I love working with her and for her. And so it was not my goal to create something that Andrew could or should be a part of. And so he'll find his own way. And
That's great,
yeah,
though. I mean, that allows him to do and find his own path and go down his own journey. Because we've talked about in the past is that if you're really tied to one person or one identity, it's the only vantage point you get, right? So having multiple different opportunities to shape you as you have, has really developed into quite a career that you're now learning still, but you're also educating, from every aspect. So Let's kind of gear this into kind of mentorship. I want to know more about Jim Summit. You talk about him and,
Yeah.
and
So Jim Summit was my boss when I joined the Air Force. Well, when I went to Germany, I'd gotten to know him. We were studying, there was a board back in those days called the Federal Services Board of General Dentistry. It's now called the American Board of General Dentistry. So it's available to everybody. Back in those days, it was essentially just federal dentists. And so when I finished my residency program, I wanted to take the board because I could get specialty pay. And so I was trying to find somebody to study with in San Antonio, and I met Jim Summit. He had finished his 2-year general dentistry residency program like I had, and he was studying for the board. So he was much better prepared didactically than I was. And so he and another guy and I studied for the board for 2 years. We took part 1 and passed it, and then we studied for part 2 and passed that. And so that's where I got to know him really well. And I thought so much of him and what I saw in him that had some impact on me wanting to join the Air Force. And so I told him I was going to join the Air Force, and he said, well, there's no place for you now at teaching in the program at San Antonio, the 2-year AGD program. And I said, that's not why I'm joining. I don't want to join to do that. I'm joining because I want to go live in Germany. I want to live in Europe, have an adventure. And so after I was there for 2.5 years, he was the one that curtailed my assignment and brought me back to work in the 2-year AGD program with him.
Sure.
And so he was my boss there for 2.5 years. And yeah, he had a giant impact on me. He's a man of great integrity. He's also was an awesome dentist back in those days. So I learned a lot from him technically, but I also learned about how to lead with integrity. He was probably my greatest teacher in that area. And then we eventually both moved to the dental school. He retired from the Air Force and I just quit. And we moved to the dental school, and we continued to have a very close friendship. And we decided back in the mid-90s to write the first version of our textbook, Fundamentals of Operative Dentistry, that's published by Quintessence. And so he and a guy named Rick Schwartz and I did that first edition of that book, and now it's in its 4th edition. But so we wrote a textbook together, and we've just been very good friends through all these years. So yeah, he's had a giant impact on me.
That's great. One thing I think you've mentioned in Global Diagnosis is he taught you to accept failure and document it and appreciate those, right? And
yeah,
I can see that as somebody that I've now a disciple of yours and a follower, is you are very open about your failures and taking those and wanting to spread the knowledge that you learn from each failure, which I tell you that takes a lot of confidence, humility, vulnerability, authenticity to really admit that these are things that you've done through your mistakes or through the lessons that you've learned from those failure. But I mean, that's a pot of gold that you're really digging from and sharing to the community. So I've noticed that that's a Jim Summit, extension of who you become, which is, quite awesome from that regard.
He told me early on, he said, success is a poor teacher. And he said, when you see failures, you absolutely must photograph them. And that would be one piece of advice I would give to everybody listening. You got to have a camera. If you're going to do interdisciplinary comprehensive dentistry, you absolutely must have a camera. And you must make the time to make photographs of your patients. And anytime you see a failure, especially if it's your own, but if it's somebody else's, then you must photograph it. And someday, some of those failures will start to make more sense. So when I had things personally fail, I didn't always know why. Sometimes I knew why, and sometimes I didn't. And sometimes I figured it out 15 or 20 years later. But I had the slides, the photographs, and to go back and go, oh yeah, that's what it was. And so,
Sure.
photographing your own failures is a very important part of growing as a dentist for sure. And now, my failures lecture, and the lessons I've learned from my failures is one of my favorite lectures that I give, because it's just fun. I mean, it's fun to look back and see, I didn't know 25 years ago about biologic width, now I do. And so here's how I figured it out. And so it's a lot of fun to look back at your work. It's not fun when you're failing. Don't get me wrong, when you're in the middle of a failure, and that's why it's hard to make yourself take a photograph, because it's like, oh God, I just put those veneers in a week ago, and now the distal incisal on number 10 is chipped. All right, we'll take a picture of it. and have the patient move into function and take another picture and try to figure this out. Have your series along the way to figure these things out. So,
but that's what makes you great, is that you not only just accept the failure, but you're wanting to know why and what comes from that, is a level of brilliance that really comes from educating yourself and then educating the community. And one thing I know about great educators are those that come up there, and there's educators that, here's my case, here's how great I am, this is it. But then there's also the other ones that really go above and beyond that and say, here are my failures. This is what I learned from that. And that's what great mentorship is. And that's what great educators do. So, I mean, bravo to that. If I
was reading an editorial, I think it was in the Jada newsletter, and it's within the last month, because sometimes they stack up on my desk, but it was a younger dentist. And right at the front, he said, the other night I was listening to a lecture by Frank Spear. And so that really caught my attention, because Frank Spear is one of those people that had a giant impact on the way I think.
Sure.
And he went on to say that he had been listening to this lecture, and Dr. Spear talked about something to the effect, every day I went to the office, I felt like I was going to jail, early in his career. And he talked about the psychological issues associated with being a dentist and how hard it was for him early on and how he dealt with it. Well, that lecture had a giant impact on that young man, enough that he wrote this editorial about it that ended up in the ADA editorial thing, And so there's another guy that really has humbled himself through the years, in my opinion, and talked about his failures and talked about his real world experience as a dentist, and that's Frank Spear. He's a master of that also.
Sure. Oh man, there's so much I can go from there. But I think if I could take away anything from knowing you the last 3 months, because we never had any connection prior to this, but it's just more the fact that you take these admissions and try and tell the community that. So I just think as a young dentist, though, it's so intimidating. You're going into an office and you're an associate here and you want to be perfect all the time. And that perfection is really what cripples you, because if you're striving for that perfection and then something bad happens, and you have a boss that doesn't support the failures, I think that's even more demeaning, and it really becomes this downhill spiral of things. And I don't know, I guess that would be my takeaway from you, is the fact that you've embraced it and knowing that you can learn from those moments of failure.
There's a question that came up in the chat. How do you respond to the patient if they ask, why are you taking a picture of the failure?
Great question.
The answer is always the same, and the answer is to respond with honesty and humility.
Sure.
And when you start trying to make excuses and stuff, I hate excuses. I hated excuses when my kids were growing up, when they messed up and they gave me excuses. I've always hated excuses. So the answer is, you be honest with people, and you either say, I think this broke because you bit on a fork. All right, if you bite on a fork, you're going to break a veneer. Or maybe it was not you. Maybe it was something related to your bite that I didn't get figured out. In other words, I just think responding to a patient with honesty, never blame, with honesty and humility. And most of the time, if they know you care, it totally disarms a negative situation. Almost everybody that gets in trouble is because the way they manage it. It's not what they did to get them in trouble. It's the way they manage it afterwards. And if in fact you do really care and the patient can tell you really care, very seldom are you going to get in trouble with that patient. Now, I've definitely had patients that have fired me and patients that have been unhappy with me, and I've had to write checks to patients to finish our relationship. I've had to do all that, but not a lot of it. I haven't had to do a lot of it because, by and large, the reality is, as long as they believe that you really care about them, then that generally gets you over the rough spots, generally speaking.
But that goes to your vision of your practice too, right? I mean, you probably have a very relationship-based type of environment at your practice, if I had to imagine. I just sense that, right? Yeah. And if you're building that relationship from the beginning and they trust that from the get-go, their understanding that things are not always going to work out the way they need to work out, right? But you'll make it right. In some way, shape, or form, you'll take care of them, and that's really, I think, what it's all about. That's
exactly, in fact, the words that I use. And that is, when I have a patient that's unhappy with something I've done, I tell them essentially, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make this okay. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, very seldom, but ultimately that means that our relationship is going to be fractured, and I'm going to have to write you a check, and you're going to have to go somewhere else. That sometimes is the ultimate outcome, but very seldom, because most of the time it never gets there as long as the patient believes you really care.
I think one thing that young dentists also do is that they talk too much, right? So if you're going to start talking too much, then it comes across as a lack of confidence and that you really screwed up that way, right? So I don't know. I'm always about just I talk too much personally, but it's also something I'm trying to take whatever I'm going to say and cut it into half. Because if it is half of it, it's probably a good amount that really should be said. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I also think that comes with time, knowing that you can really
I
kind of
totally
shape.
agree. And talking too much is generally, not always, it can be a personality style, but generally talking too much is a response to insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you talk, the more you're going to try to convince people, a patient, that you really understand what they need and you know a lot and blah, 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 and you're wearing a white coat. So I totally agree. Young dentists talk too much. And I did too, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously more about asking the right questions and then listening to the answers. And
Sure.
Mark Hyman is the classy expert on that with his 10 questions for sure.
Exactly. No, those 10 questions were great, and go back and watch those many different 10 question things that he did. But I just, let's transition to the global diagnostic stuff. This is something that is a topic that I didn't have any exposure to when I first started through the COVID conferences. And through your lessons, I started learning all these little hour snippets and eventually kind of grabbed onto this global diagnosis. And we have had some people email me saying, I'm right out of school. I don't really know where to go and how to get the education behind things of diagnosis and treatment planning. And one thing I would push is the global diagnosis platform that you're building. And you've built this study club through ACT. And I think it's important that you highlight this, because I've learned a lot already. And I think it's something that I would love to share it with the community that's listening right now.
Yeah, great. So when I first started lecturing seriously about 30 years ago, my favorite subject was the gummy smile. And the reason I like talking about it is because general dentists enjoyed that subject and nobody else was talking about it. So I was teaching a differential diagnosis for the gummy smile. I did not create it. I didn't figure it out. I got it from other people, but I used it and taught it. And then I went, when I left the dental school, I went into private practice with Jeff Rouse, and that's a name many people know.
Sure.
He's become a world-class airway guy, teaches at the Spear Center. And Jeff and I practiced a number of years together, and we're still very close friends. And during those years we were practicing together, it was a very rich time because I'd been lecturing quite a bit, and he was just a beginner lecturer, but he's really smart. And so we started teaching the the gummy smile stuff together. And he's the one that was clever enough to realize that there's really a greater use for this material than just the gummy smile. So over the years, working together, it morphed from the gummy smile to global diagnosis. And global diagnosis is a systematic approach of looking at the complex interdisciplinary patient. And in the global diagnosis system, there are 4 primary global diagnoses that you have to understand. In order to make a diagnosis on a patient, you have to ask and answer the 5 global diagnosis or core questions that we teach. So essentially the system is 4 diagnoses, 5 questions that lead you to the diagnostic process. And then we only have 6 tools or 6 ways to fix any tooth, gingiva, interface problem. So 4, 5, 6 global diagnosis is 4 diagnoses, 5 questions, 6 treatment options. And so that's the system that I've been teaching now for the last 20 years. And Jeff, obviously, if I say I don't really mean I mean we, because
Sure.
this would have never come to fruition without Jeff. It was a partnership that continues today. And so he's moved more into the airway area. I continue to move more into the global diagnosis area. We did a book together about 4 years ago on global diagnosis, published by Quintessence. And so that's my most important contribution, I think, and that is this systematic approach of looking at the face, the gingiva, and the teeth, and figuring out what falls outside the norm. And once you fall outside, figure out what it is, and once you name it, then you can treatment plan it. And that's the global diagnosis system. And so I have a good friend named Jim Otten, who's a restorative dentist in Lawrence, Kansas. We've been friends for quite a number of years. And our interests in dentistry in some ways are very parallel, but he's gone into areas and gotten better than I have. So he has his area of strengths and I've got my area of strengths. And A couple of years ago, we were together, our wives and I, and the four of us were together on a vacation, and we were talking about the idea of creating some type of consulting platform or something. We didn't know what to do. And we talked about it, but we never got anything going. And during this COVID crisis, when we were doing all of these COVID lectures with Kurt and the ACT team, after about a month of it, it hit me, this is what we ought to do. We ought to create a virtual study club like we've been doing on the ACT platform. And so he and I started this thing, I don't know, 3 months ago. And we're now into our fifth week. And we meet on Fridays from, let me make sure I get it right, 9 to 11 Eastern time. Mm-hmm. And so it's an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes on Friday mornings. And we're going through foundational information related to global diagnosis right now. But Jim's really great accomplishment in dentistry is more related to all of the issues associated with function. So he's become a world-class expert in occlusion, in airway, in joint pathology and treatment of those complex patients. And so I've been more on the complex restorative side. He's been more on the joint side. And obviously I treat joint patients and he treats complex patients, but his skill set really complements.
Yeah, the perfect marriage. Mm-hmm.
And so we're having a great deal of fun doing this. And we meet in the evening several times a week on a Zoom call and continue to plan on how we're building this. And we're getting a lot of help from the ACT team, especially from Caroline and Kinsey, who are helping us tonight. They've done a ton helping us with our website and getting every week, it gets better. Every week we add a place for articles that we expect the members to read and the handouts that are there. And we now start to have an instrument list of things, a camera list of things that we feel like you're going to have along the way. You're going to have, it doesn't have to be an expensive camera, but you have to have a camera if you're going to grow in this community. And so, because we will be posting cases and so on as we get through the foundational information. So we're having just a great deal of fun, and we've got a really nice community that we meet with every Friday morning. And it's been a lot of fun.
I've loved it. I work most of the days that you're doing this, but the recordings have been great. So even if you can't do Friday at 9, to me, I've loved just listening and hearing about the experiences. I think you and Jim combining everything together from that is really quite the complement of each other in terms of that. But ultimately, the sign of a great educator is someone that can take something very complex, which is what this type of dentistry is, and really simplify it so it's understandable. So for someone like me, who's your average Joe, can implement it and become inspired by this. So for me, I've taken so much away from this. So if anyone's listening, by all means, jump into this thing. You're not too late either. You can go back to the recordings and kind of catch up because it's only been, 4 weeks or so? And
in fact, my first lecture 6 weeks ago was a lecture on failures. And then the next week, Jim had a great lecture on a patient he had seen the week before. And
awesome.
He talked about all the things that he thinks about when he sees a new patient like this one, and then showed some examples of things that he had done. I thought it was a great lecture. And then after that, we've had a couple of global diagnosis lectures doing the foundational work with global diagnosis. So we still got a bunch of global diagnosis lectures to go. And as you said, this stuff is all, for the members, it's all recorded. And so you can go back and listen to it at any time. If you can't be there on Friday morning, it doesn't matter. It's all recorded for the membership.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I guess one question, I'm just trying to think from a young dentist perspective. What if I don't work in an office that facilitates a lot of this type of treatment? But I want to learn, I want to do this, and I want to do this type of dentistry. What would you recommend for somebody in those?
Well, I think you have to have short and long-term visions for yourself, for what you want to do and where you want to be. And if a young dentist is in a circumstance right now that doesn't allow the ability to do interdisciplinary type dentistry, I get that. And a lot of us have to do things that we don't necessarily want to do, but we have to because we've got kids and we've got mortgages and we've got to make payments on all of those things. So I get that. That's why I think it's good to have short-term goals. And the short-term goal is to get through it. If you're in that circumstance, it's not very rewarding now, but that's where you are right now, then do the best you can to learn what you can in that circumstance, because there's always things to learn. But long term, if that's not meeting your goals, not only perhaps financially, but spiritually, you know, there's so many dentists that just see dentistry as a way of making a living because it's not fun. And I get that. If somebody's breathing down your neck and you have to do so much production every hour and it's day after day after day, it's not fun. But to some degree, in terms of the long-term goal, most of us are in charge of our future. And so I would say if you can't do it now, it's still nice to put the information on the shelf. It doesn't mean you can use it every day, but you can certainly learn it. You can certainly understand the global diagnosis system, and you can even think about it on patients. It doesn't mean that you're going to ever do the dentistry on them, but you can go through the diagnostic process. You can ask the 5 questions, and you can do the treatment planning as an intellectual exercise until you're in the point where you can do it for real. Mm-hmm. There's many ways to transition from a practice that's not rewarding to one that's more rewarding. And I think one way that makes the most sense is to pick out a half a day in your practice. If you've got the ability to do that in the practice situation you're in, make that half day the comprehensive day. And that half day, let's say it's Wednesday afternoon, you're not going to see emergencies. You're not going to do single tooth dentistry. The only thing that goes in the comprehensive afternoon is either comprehensive exams or quadrant dentistry. And if you don't have one of those 2 things, then don't fill it up with other stuff because it'll be easy to do. That's when you're going to go back and start doing diagnostic mountings or start doing a little bit of a diagnostic wax up. Or you're going to start watching videos on things that you need to learn about. In other words, that's your didactic afternoon if you can't fill it up. And ultimately, if your team members believe that this is a good thing for you, if you help them understand why you're doing this, then you will find it will be your most favorite afternoon. And then once it starts being filled up, every Wednesday afternoon is full of something in the comprehensive arena, then you make one more half day, a comprehensive day. Because you can't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. You cannot go into your office tomorrow and say, okay, we're getting off all the plans or we're making big changes. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You've got to keep the home fires burning. And so it's got to be done in a slow, I think, and meticulous way, not just a major change from one day to the next. Incrementally make that change.
Well, that's when you get all confused and you burn out from all those different aspects. But you've also said that only 85 or 15% of your practice is this specialty stuff, right? I mean,
yeah, probably. I'd say probably 75%, 80% of what I do is single tooth dentistry. And I'm glad you brought it up because when I lecture, I don't show single tooth dentistry. All I show is cool stuff. And it would be easy to assume that all I do is cool stuff. So today, I mean, I did one really cool thing today, and that was a motivational mock-up on a patient that helped her understand that she needed 10 veneers. She didn't need 4, right? So it was time well spent because at the end of the day, I didn't have to convince her of anything. I had 2 photographs, one the way she is and one the way she looked with the motivational mock-up done. That was cool. I love that part of the day.
And you probably put them up and let her just look at them. You didn't say anything, right?
Pardon?
You put those 2 photos up there and didn't say anything, right? I mean,
just say, this is the way it is, and this is the way it could be. And they almost all, they look forward into the into the screen, and they lean back and they look at you, and then can you really do this? I mean, the motivational mock-up is my favorite deal. But I did a bunch of class 5 composites on non-carious cervical lesions today. I did a new patient exam. I did a little of this. I did a little of that. So, I did a lot of single tooth dentistry today, but it's fine. The single tooth dentistry is fine. I don't mind it as long as I've got some comprehensive dentistry sprinkled into it. That's what keeps me feeling okay.
No doubt.
In fact, if I had a practice that was all rehabilitation dentistry, it takes a lot of gastric mucosa to have that kind of practice. And I'm not sure I'm man enough to do that. So I like a mix of single tooth dentistry and comprehensive dentistry. That mix works well for me.
Entirely. And then I think Kirk always says this, if you just slow things down, you end up finding that you produce and do better dentistry, right? So I used the example last week, but I had a new patient and I've seen now 4 of their kids. They all have some functional issues, but they also have some caries issues, right? So I think in dental school, you're trained, new patient, let's go right to the x-rays, MOD on 2, MOD, whatever it is, and you start naming off all the caries, but really you're missing the entire story. So eventually, yeah, we're going to do the fillings or whatever it may be, but having these discussions and slowing things down, it really can open up the door to a lot of comprehensive quality care for the patient that they're treated with the best intention too. But she even said, I don't understand how you're spending an hour with new patients. That doesn't seem like it's very productive in a busy office. But then when it came out of it, she's got examine records for diagnostic understanding of things, which will eventually lead to some type of orthodontics and treatment that go far beyond the 2 fillings that she needed, when she first came in. So
Yep.
that's really what I would recommend to new dentists is, block off that time. And then when you have that block, keep it there instead of having it filled in with emergencies and stuff, because eventually you will fill it in. And it sometimes can become overwhelming, that number of cases that you have building up now. And you want to say, let's just slow down this comprehensive care because it's not going to work.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you're seeing 30 or 40 new patients a month, which a lot of dentists are,
Sure.
I mean, you can't do comprehensive exams on 30 or 40 patients a month. That's impossible.
Right.
And so that's when you have to have enough sense to realize which ones you can do the new patient experience in the hygiene room and which ones you can't. And the ones that you can't, you're never going to do the comprehensive dentistry on them unless you do a comprehensive exam. That's one thing I do know for sure. You will not be doing complicated dentistry or more complex full mouth, full need dentistry if you don't do a comprehensive exam. So
Correct.
one way or the other, you have to figure out the patients that need that type of dentistry. You owe them a comprehensive exam.
Yep. And as a new dentist, I'm sure you would agree with this. You get those examinations by doing global diagnosis education, Coyce, Spear, Dawson, Pankey. I know it's a lot of money, but it will pay for itself, especially at a young age, because it just compounds after that. So it's a lot of money invested initially, but you're not going to get the quality education that you're going to get by doing a state dental meeting. Going to one of those meetings and getting one of those, I'm not trying to undervalue that or whatever it may be, but you're going to get the quality comprehensive examination and build on that curriculum base by doing one of those 4.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would agree with that too.
For sure. Yeah. Big meetings are just for one thing. And that is to get a vision. It's just like getting a sampler. You get a box of chocolates and you're going to a sampler for 3 days, and hopefully you're going to find 1 or 2 in there that you really believe are the ones that you want to then pursue. And you then go and take their other courses wherever they're teaching. So I totally agree.
And then through those educational venues, then you start developing a mentorship, aspect of things. You start grabbing hold of these people that are going to help shape you, because they were in your shoes at one point too, and they just want to guide you along. So those are the people that you really want as mentors, the ones that are taking hundreds of hours to see each year, as opposed to the people that are just kind of tinkering around and not doing the type of dentistry that you really want to do, that you find valuable. And I think that's important. So
yeah, I would say many young dentists just can't afford to do a bunch of the more expensive continuums. I totally get that. I think the absolute best money a young dentist can spend is joining a local study club.
No doubt.
And for whatever it is, $1,500 or $1,000 or even $2,000 for a year, I think it is absolutely the best money that you can spend, because you get more bang for your buck, number one, and number two, that's the place where you meet those older dentists that will take an interest in you. So if you're legitimately interested in having somebody mentor you, the very best place to find that type of person is in a study club. So that is the other piece of advice I can say with confidence. Join a study club.
That's huge. Huge. I mean, I got connected right away out of dental school, and I grabbed onto my mentor, who's still a close friend of mine to this day. And to me, he held my hand literally through preps, and we did a case together many times at his office, and it gave you the confidence. And I think that's the biggest thing is once you have people that take interest in you, it inspires confidence and understands that you can do this type of work. We've all been there. We know what you're doing and we know how you can get you into a better place. So,
and it's a great opportunity to get to know a handful of specialists
yes,
that could become really important in your life. My best referrals are from specialists. I only get patients from two places, essentially. One is from other patients in my practice, and the second is the specialist. And the referrals I get from specialists are the best. I mean, they're the best patients. They're already sold. They
yep,
generally need a fair amount of dentistry. All I have to do is just not screw it up. And,
exactly.
it's there. But obviously, and I'm an old guy. I've earned that. And as a young dentist, you're going to have to earn that. And the number one way, so I said I don't give advice, and now I keep giving advice. This is another thing I really believe is true, though, and that is the number one way to help specialists believe that you're worth their referrals is by making exquisite provisionals. Spend time on your provisionals. And when specialists see provisionals that are beautifully done, it will make you stand out so much compared to all of the other stuff they see, because they see a lot of lousy provisionals. So that little extra time you spend to really trim them and really polish them pays dividends long term with your specialist in terms of referrals down the road.
Well, that's the best advice you can give, right? So, I mean, I don't know. We're running out of time here, but any final last words that you may want to give to these young generation of people that are coming up?
Once again, I've given more advice than I should have.
Sure.
In some ways, I have a great deal of envy for those of you who've been in dentistry for less than 10 years, because it's just never been better. I mean, for me, I've been at it now, I think 47 years, and it's never been better. And between the technology and the materials that are available now, and the opportunities at the top, there will always be a place at the top for the fine dentist. So yes, dentistry has obviously changed a lot in the last 15 years. There's no doubt. But I believe, and maybe it's just because I choose to believe it, but I believe that there will always be a group of patients that want more than that average that is out there, because it's everywhere. There's a lot of average dentistry. We know that. And I believe there will be a place at the top always for those who choose to seek that place. And, you have to have the vision that that's what you want to do. And then you have to put the skills on the shelf. And that's not just the dental skills, that's the behavioral skills also. And it's a life work. So there is no easy way to get there. It is a life work. But I
If it was
promise
easy,
you
it
won't
wouldn't be
burn out.
worthwhile.
That's the beauty is you don't burn out if you've got purpose. And that's one of the things that I heard over and over again on the At COVID series. It's purpose that keeps people from burning out. And you got to keep purpose in your life.
No doubt. Well, I loved having this conversation. I think the world of you, Bill. I think it's just something that I've learned so much from just our 3-4 months together. And truly, at some point in my life, I hope to come back and share to my colleagues or whoever it was that Bill Robbins shaped me, just as much as, Jim Summit and all these other people shaped you. So, I mean, you're in that tier of my crew. So, it means a lot to me to have you on the show and continue to keep coming on as my official, unofficial co-host. And to me, it's something I keep learning more and more from you. And I hope the community does too, because I think the world of you and what you offer. So we will be offering these recordings as well on YouTube. So, Kinsey will keep putting them up there. And I think that's important. And I've loved all the emails and all the messages. So keep them coming. I think I'm doing a pretty good job responding. And it's something that I've had numerous phone calls with people. And I think it's something that it's really enjoyable part of my drive home, just to kind of help pull some guidance and direction for people and allow for people to know that I'm here. This is the intention of the show. And it's something that I think is important to keep going forward and keep bettering the community, because that's all it's about. So that's all I have to say, guys. I think it's something that's been fun.
Hey, thanks. So, I can't wait till the time that we actually get to meet each other and give each other a hug in
I know,
person,
right?
because we developed like this real friendship and
No
it's all
doubt.
been virtual, which is
Yeah.
just it's an interesting new world that we're
Sure.
in. But our virtual friendship has become a really one that I cherish, and it'll be
Great.
fun to be able to get together at some
Yeah, I
point.
talked to Eric Rindler on Saturday, and we were just saying, this is, I guess, our first introduction to say hello. But at the same point, we
Yeah,
feel like we're friends. It's a weird time, but I think it's something we can all embrace
it is indeed.
and bring out the best in each other. So we also do have a new website. So Kinsey's been working hard on this, newdentistshow.com. It's something that we're still tweaking, but I think it's also something we're going to have the recordings on there. I'm going to start posting some type of recap of every episode and my takeaways from that, and also just kind of have an interactive type of forum as well. So feel free to get on there or just email me, kevingroth@gmail.com. It's something that I'm always open for feedback in any type of capacity. So thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much for
Thanks
Kinsey.
for having me, my friend. It's been fun. Who's
It's been
coming on
really
next
fun.
week?
Next week is John Cranham. So that'll be fun.
I'll be there.
The Dawson Academy. I hope you jump on. I think that'd be a really cool conversation to have both of you on there.
For sure.
So,
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for everybody that came tonight. It was
Sure.
really fun being with you, Kevin. Thank you.
And then the following is Rob Ritter. So that'll be fun too. So I think
Rob
Rob quite well too. So it'll be good. So we got a good lineup coming down the pipeline, which is good. So
excellent.
awesome, guys.
Thanks.
Enjoy the night. So we'll see you later. Thank you.